Hi, I'm really happy to introduce you today to Karen Willock. Karen, would you like to tell us a little bit about what prompted you to respond to my question about navigating difficult relationships? Maybe start before the difficult relationships.
Okay. Well, thanks for asking me, Nancy. I really appreciate it very much. And my so I'm the clinical director of the Portland Treehouse Recovery, and the or clinical supervisor, sorry. And then I'm the clinical family program director for the family program at Treehouse, which serves all of our different locations from Costa Mesa, Portland, Tennessee, North Carolina.
Wow.
So we're located in 4 different states right now. Um, what intrigued me when I got the original email is I've worked in the field of addiction for gosh, 42 years. And I got into it specifically because really by accident to begin with, but I entered into it because I was raised by alcoholics who both passed away from alcoholism.
Mm,
I became addicted myself, and then I had children who were also suffered from addiction.
wow.
And so my whole life, I'm going to come back as a frog or something. My whole life has been involved with either active addiction or recovery from addiction. So, how, and you certainly interrupt me if you have any questions. Um, how I came into, so I'm 74, I'll be 75 this year. So I work in this field, not anymore because I have to, but because it really, the question that you sent was about navigating difficult families and having a healthy relationship, which is the theme song of the world, right?
Mhm.
I mean, if you want to find out how you navigate a relationship, get into one because you will discover it very quickly.
Yes,
And how much our past reflects how we navigate our present.
absolutely.
And so, it's
Karen, excuse me. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how your parents' alcoholism influenced your childhood?
oh my goodness.
I know that's a huge topic.
Yeah, well, they were both um, very chronic late stage alcoholics by the time I was born. My dad
Wow.
had been in the uh, uh, Korean War, and I'm pretty sure he had now I'm realizing I'm sure he had some form of PTSD, and he was a very severe alcoholic. He died by the time he was in his 40s.
Wow.
Um, my mom was quite a bit older than him, and I had an older sister who was 17 years older, and then she had myself and my brother. My sister's experience with them, um, my dad was not her dad, but her experience with my mother was entirely different than mine.
You
So
know,
she,
Karen, I think that is so often true that depending on what birth order you're in, how much difference there is between children, and what your personality is compared to your parents, maybe
right.
we all experience a different parent, even though we're raised in the same family.
That's right. I mean, if you take an orange and you hold it up in front of some three people and you ask each of them to describe that orange, they'll all see it differently
Hmm.
because that's how we're made, right? We're
Hmm.
made to have our own perception.
Right.
So my parents, by the time I was born, I was the oldest of the two children born at the end. My mom was in her 40s then, and my dad was in his early 20s. So there was a big age
Okay.
difference.
Hmm.
And my mother, uh, there was a lot of violence between them, a lot of drinking, going to bars. Um, it was very difficult. It was very confusing. Kind of the themes, what I like to do with myself and other people is to look at the themes of my childhood, and those where it was inconsistent, it was unpredictable, it was neglectful
Mm-hmm.
on many levels. We had a home, we had food, but children need more than that because that attachment to their people is what drives them in their life.
And when it's that inconsistent and neglectful, it's a perfect setup for addiction later.
It's a perfect setup. And it's also a perfect setup to have very unhealthy relationships
Right.
because we end up recreating what I know now is my limbic system, my
Yes.
unconscious holds in memory all of those fractured attachments. So I'm comfortable with fractured attachments.
Exactly. Do
It's
you
just
know anything
crazy.
about your grandparents? What kind of relationship your parents had growing up with their parents?
My dad was second generation or first generation from Poland.
Okay.
My mother was first generation from Ireland.
They were
My
immigrants.
yes, my dad's dad was alcoholic.
Hmm.
My mother's dad was alcoholic.
It's so interesting, isn't it? If you study a family systems diagram, how certain patterns are passed on from generation to
Yes.
generation.
And I think it's actually in our DNA. I think it's genetically and also environmentally. So
Hmm.
you get those all these factors
Hmm.
and poof, you've got trouble. Just
I
like that.
didn't I didn't have alcoholism in my family, but there were certainly very dysfunctional relationships. And I remember by the time I was in my 30s, I imagined myself standing in a river with this river of dysfunctional relationships flowing toward me. And I determined I will change the course of the river. I will
Wow.
not pass this on to my children and grandchildren. And of course, I had duplicated a lot of the patterns that had to be changed. It took a lot of
Right.
work to change
Yes, it
those
does.
patterns.
And what we know, Nancy, is that we can change those patterns if we're willing to invest
Yes.
the time and make the commitment
Yes,
because
absolutely.
it demands both.
Yes, it
And
does.
so what happens, so my mom died when I was around 17. I was still pretty young, still in high school. Dad died when I was in my 40s, or he was in his 40s. I was in my 20s, a long time ago.
Hmm.
And um, in some ways, it was somewhat of a relief
Yes.
because the sometimes I like to call it misfunction. The misfunction in our house was so uh, big,
Severe.
yeah, so severe that really, in some degrees, and I thought, phew, that's over.
Hmm.
And that was my first mistake because
Yes.
because I was carrying all of that with me,
Right.
right? And little did I know that what I held in memory for me was getting close to people was painful.
Hmm.
And so this is all on an unconscious level. So when I would start to get close to someone, then I would do something to distance.
Hmm.
And so I would have these on again, off again, you know, uh, I didn't know how to have a difficult conversation.
Hmm.
There was so much I didn't know how to do. And then my own addiction was very active. And so everything was kind of put on hold. And I was kind of like a tornado. I was from Nebraska originally, roaring through. So, so addiction in my family goes back, I don't even know how many generations. I will say that now recovery is also in our generation.
Yay.
Yes,
You've changed the
strong
course of the
recovery.
river for your family.
Yes. And mothers have a very interesting, as I've worked with families, because the people I work with are people that are dealing with addiction. And there isn't a more complicated relationship with your son or daughter or your husband or your wife or your parents than to have active addiction and you're baffled by what to do. And
Right.
what if I don't do this? What will happen? And if I do this, what will happen? And the literal torture that goes on in a family member's mind when they're trying to save this person
Mm-hmm.
and how exhausted they become on every level
And then resentful.
and angry.
Yes.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Angry, controlling, those are a codependence drugs of choice. I have them listed here on my desk. Control, drama, fear, shame, blame, guilt, gossip, and I could go on and on. So as a codependent, as an affected family member, my mission becomes to abandon myself
Mm-hmm.
and take care of you.
I have my elder son became a drug addict at the age of 15. And I was the classic codependent mother trying to save him, which gave me a 15-year journey of gradually disconnecting from codependency. And I remember vividly when he was probably 22, riding in the car with him and saying to him, Steve, I have something important to tell you. I've decided that your life is your life, and you get to live it any way you want.
That's right.
And I will never bring up recovery or pressure you or guilt you again. If you decide you want to get into some recovery program and you ask me for help, I'll move heaven and earth to find a good one for you. But until that happens, I will not mention it again.
Wow.
And he told me years later that it was like a 200-pound weight lifted off of him because he not only felt shame for how he was living, but he felt shame for what he knew it was doing to me.
Yes.
And in that conversation, I also said, I want you to know that no matter what you do, I'm going to be okay.
Wow.
It was so liberating for both of us, and there were more lessons to come, but that was a huge turning point for me.
I call those defining moments.
Yes, definitely.
All of those 15 years brought you to that one moment where you realized that you had no ability to change anyone else but yourself.
That was only 7 years into our journey together.
Wow.
He eventually, at the age of 27, was hospitalized with congestive heart failure because of all the years of speed
Sure.
and he couldn't work anymore, and he came home to live with us. The doctor told me he can die any day. So for the next 2.5 years, which he lived, I lived with the realization that he may die today. If he sleeps late in the morning, should I open the door and see if he's alive?
Right.
There were more lessons during those 2.5 years, but he eventually, on his own, decided that he wanted to die with self-respect, and the only way he could do that was to die clean.
Wow.
And he cut everything out, and I don't know why detox didn't kill him. But for the last 4 or so months of his life, I had the real Stephen back, not the addict Stephen.
Wow.
It
How
was such a
beautiful.
precious gift.
Oh, for him and you.
Yes, for both of us.
Yeah. Wow. That's really, in a nutshell, what recovery from this hideous torture that family members go through. That is a perfect example. And I know the blood, sweat, and tears for you that it
Yes,
took to get there. I
yes.
remember the one for me, and it was I want to say it's probably been 16 or 17 years ago. I've had a few of these defining
Mm-hmm.
moments, but it was with my middle son, and he was using a lot of drugs, and he had overdosed many times, been arrested. I had gone to church that day, which I normally didn't, but I went that day, and I
Mm-hmm.
walked in and I saw that they had a cemetery, and I didn't know that. And I thought, I had this sense that washed over me that, oh my God, am I going to bury my sweet son in this
Mm-hmm.
cemetery?
Mm-hmm.
And I was laying in bed that night. The nights are always the worst.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's when everything kind of quiets down and my mind
Right.
comes in. And I start wondering what's going to happen and
Mm-hmm.
thinking or planning or preparing or
Mm-hmm.
so many hours that I spent. And what happened, I laid there and I thought, oh my God, I could bury this kid that I adore and love
Mm-hmm.
so much,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't stop the train that
Right.
he's on.
Right.
And it was a very exhausting moment
Mm-hmm.
where mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, intellectually, I just felt my energy drain.
Yeah.
And the next morning, I asked my my partner, I said, "How do you know when you're feeling too much?" And she shared an experience in her life where she actually spent time every day feeling her feelings
Yes.
for quite some time. One of the things that, and this is why I love working for families, with families, and for them. I'm on their team, and is because I I realized that the feeling I was denying, my disowned emotion that dated clear back to mom and
Yes.
dad,
Yes.
was sadness.
Yes.
I could be angry.
Yeah.
Oh boy, could I be angry. I could be afraid,
Mm-hmm.
but I did not want to be sad. And
Anger is, and even fear are more powerful emotions. We feel more
yes,
powerful when we're angry.
yes,
To feel sad is so vulnerable.
so vulnerable. So I got in the shower that next morning and I thought about this sweet boy of mine when he was a baby and how happy he was and how
Mm-hmm.
much I loved him. And I just cried. I thought if I
Mm-hmm.
started crying, I would
Mm-hmm.
never stop. You know, I was a nurse at one time.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like taking care of sick people, to
Mm-hmm.
be honest with
Okay.
you. But, and I wasn't very good at it either because I was under the influence. So it was a combination probably.
Mm-hmm.
But, um, oh shoot, I lost my whole train
You
of
were in the
thought.
shower crying.
Oh, and I thought about him and I thought if I was afraid that if I started crying, I would cry forever.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Nancy, I only cried for a minute, maybe
Mm-hmm.
a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got out, got dressed for work and went. And I did that every morning for a solid year. Pretty soon I
Wow.
didn't even know what I was crying about.
Yeah.
I just would cry, just
The
cry.
grief that was buried in you needed to come out.
Yes. And there's no way to, there's no, you can't bury those feelings alive. God knows I tried. I poured stuff
Mm-hmm.
on them. I shot dope into them. I married into them. I fixed
Mm-hmm.
people into them. I did everything I could to bury them. But
Right.
the only way through them was just to name them and allow
Mm-hmm.
them to exist.
Naming them is the first step, in my experience anyway. Naming them is such a powerful step. This
Yes.
is what I'm feeling.
Yeah. Because as long, I'll tell you what addiction wants two things. It wants me alone and vague.
Mm-hmm.
That is the breeding ground of addiction. I don't care what the addiction is,
Right.
but as long as I'm alone and vague and I don't name it. So I
Mm-hmm.
started naming it, you know, the horrific sadness.
Yes.
And then pretty soon I started noticing that my day was going a little better,
Mm-hmm.
that I wasn't thinking about him every minute of every
Mm-hmm.
single day.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the end of the year, it was almost like that big sigh of,
Yes.
and now when I'm off and I can feel it, I get in
Mm-hmm.
my shower and I cry.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's not very often anymore. I'm
Uh-huh.
so happy to say that then rocket years forward, he's got 6 years almost now, clean and sober. I have a beautiful little
Oh,
grandson from him.
wonderful.
Totally different outcome than what I had feared. Um, all three of my boys I just adore. I tell
Mhm.
every one of them, you're my favorite. Don't tell your brother.
Tell us where did you make the commitment to your own sobriety?
I think, well, my sobriety started February 19th, 1983 was the last chemical of any kind that I used. And I came in not because I wanted to, but because I was driven, because there had been a death in my family that was a murder, and I had wanted revenge. And I knew if I was high, I wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what brought me in. It's not what kept me in,
Right.
but I ended up in the strangest place, this meeting where they didn't welcome you or tell you you were welcome or say hi or anything, but they were my kind of people. They were misfits because I was a misfit.
Uh-huh.
They were angry and I was angry. They
Yeah.
weren't afraid of my pain or my anger, but they taught me some principles to live by. And that's where it started for me.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I mean, there's so much that's happened over the years. I was 5 years clean and sober when I realized I couldn't or would not get revenge because it's not who I am.
It's interesting to me that your addiction began with grief, and grief, naming and expressing your grief was a part of your recovery.
Yeah, big part. It's what I didn't want to feel.
Right.
It's what I wanted to avoid.
Yes.
And drugs helped me avoid it for a while. Uh, Crazy relationships with crazy people
Hmm.
help distract me for a while.
I was just thinking the word distraction.
Yeah, because it takes a lot of noise to quiet this little voice that's within us.
Hmm.
And so when I start creating chaos and drama, I always go, oh, Karen,
Okay.
what's going on here?
Hmm.
What is it you don't, if you weren't creating this chaos and drama, what would you be doing? So I don't want to be a producer of chaos. I want to be a producer of harmony.
Hmm.
And you know what makes it so easy, Nancy, to work with families who are experiencing? I was at a funeral last night for a
Hmm.
24-year-old boy who did, and to me, 24, they're boys who
Yes.
had gone out again and fentanyl was in the chemical and he's dead.
Mm.
And I sat there and I, that's what can happen, as you know,
Right.
from this disease. That's why we fight so hard.
Hmm.
What, what, what is so important to me is I'm not afraid of their pain.
Hmm.
I've had my own, and I know that anybody can grow, anybody can heal. I didn't think that was true.
Yes. Well, when you're in so much pain that you're doing everything you can to hide from it, it's hard to believe there's a way out.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't believe there was, and there's been so many. Some people call them angels, some people call them Eskimos. There's been so many people over the years they parented me. They
Hmm.
reparented me until I could reparent myself. They taught me until I could teach myself.
Hmm.
They introduced me to, I used to drive by houses that had shades like I have on my windows and lights on and think, what is it like to live there?
Yes, yes.
Well, it's nice.
Mm-hmm.
That's what.
Because that's where you live now.
Yes. And this I know, no one chooses to blow their life up.
Yeah.
No one chooses to become so addicted that they starve their bodies of nutrients
Mm-hmm.
and food uh, and connection with other people. That is how powerful these
Mm-hmm.
diseases are. No mom abandons herself to the point where her heart is crushed and the
Mm-hmm.
life is draining out of her body for any other reason than we love so big,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so hard to watch that happen to the people we love. It's the hardest thing, a parent. And just like you described, it's not a one and done kind of thing.
Gosh, no.
I wished it was. I tell
Yeah.
them I don't have any magic lever. I'm
Yeah.
not going to sprinkle fairy dust on you and everything's going to be dynamite. No, this is a decision by decision by decision. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I was working in Eugene at one time, and I took my little penny lane for a walk, um and we were walking, and it was cold and it snowed a little bit, and here was this old man who had obviously slept outside, snot running down his face, his cheeks were red, you know, he was cold. He
Right.
would not look me in the eye,
Yeah.
and he looked at my dog, and I thought, this is the thought I had, why him and not me?
Wowee.
Why is he there and I'm here?
Yeah.
And I pondered that through the rest of my walk. And I crossed the threshold of the place I was staying. And this is a thought that came to me: one decision at a time.
Mm-hmm.
I got there one decision. He got there one decision. It
Yes.
wasn't like, this is what I'm going to do. This
Right.
is who I'm going to be.
Right.
One decision after another.
When Stephen was hospitalized and came to live with us because he was so terminal, I assumed that he would stop using. It was such a naive, I mean, even after all the years of watching his addiction, it was so naive of me. I so underestimated the power of addiction.
Yes.
And when he made the decision to stop using so that he could die with self-respect, I look back at that now and I'm just amazed that he was able to do it. I have so much respect for
Yeah.
the choice he made and stayed with until the day he died.
Yeah. He died with dignity,
Yes,
which was his desire.
that was his desire.
He came in this world with dignity and he left it with dignity.
Hmm.
And the dash in between was a struggle.
It was a terrible struggle. It was so painful to watch him struggle. He was extremely intelligent, very gifted intelligence. But his father died when he was 2.
Mm,
I was 23. I was a kid myself.
yep.
And the only thing I I didn't know how to process my emotions. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, change another diaper, fix a scrambled egg, until finally life began to look good again. But I knew that Stephen never got over his dad's death. He was so attached to his dad.
See, both of my boys, their dad passed away too.
Really?
He committed suicide.
Oh,
It
dear.
was from addiction and
Wow.
mental illness both.
Mm-hmm.
And they were 3 and 7 now. Then they're
Yes.
33 and 37 now.
Yes.
So yeah, it's
Well,
huge.
well, one of the, it's hard to measure what it seems when other people look at Stephen's life, it seems like such a waste.
Mm.
But for me, it taught me such valuable lessons
Mm.
that I've been coaching people for 30 years, teaching couples primarily how to live together with respect without fighting. But a few years ago, I wrote a book about my journey out of codependency, and I
Oh,
called it
wow.
Pungent Boundaries.
Oh, I'd love to read that.
Well, you can get it on Amazon.
Okay.
And I called it pungent because boundary setting isn't fun work. It's not sweet. Sometimes it's noisy. But I've been told it's helped many parents that have
Mm.
read it to be more comfortable with the process of setting boundaries for their child
Mm.
out of
I'm
love
writing
for
it down.
them.
Pungent, right?
Pungent,
Yeah.
Pungent.
Okay. I will look that up
I'd
because you
love
know
for
what?
you to
Every
read it. I'd love for
relationship,
you to tell me, give me some feedback about it.
you bet. Every relationship is based on boundaries.
Yes, every healthy relationship has good boundaries. Unhealthy relationship invariably has a lack of good boundaries.
That's right. Communication and boundaries are the key to a healthy relationship.
Hmm.
My problem was I didn't have the skills in either.
No, you didn't because there was no one to model them for you.
Right, right. My mom allowed my dad to abuse her. They
Hmm.
drank together. They fought together.
Hmm.
So my and what I was going to do it different,
Yes.
and so my way was leave.
And we think leaving is enough. We don't realize how much of that has imprinted us that
Right.
to make us recreate it.
You know what it is, Nancy? I think for the first half of my life, I sleepwalked,
Hmm.
and then I had to wake up.
Yes.
I had to learn about this brain of mine and how it functions,
Hmm.
and that limbic system is spewing hormones and energy into my body. When it sees
Hmm.
something, it remembers. It's like the best
Hmm.
computer in the world. And
Hmm.
I need to get this prefrontal cortex thinking, not
Hmm.
reacting.
Yes.
I want to be able to think. If a problem really happens, I want to be able to really think. The
Yes.
biggest tool I teach couples or anybody else is when you're triggered, shut up.
Yes. Yes. Good for you.
I have never seen one argument end well when both people are triggered.
Argument very rarely reaches any good conclusion. You're only passing the triggers back and forth.
That's right. So my first rule is, and it's my rule for me, it was the
Hmm.
first thing I had to learn, Karen, be quiet.
Hmm.
And the words are beating on the back of my lips wanting to get
Yes.
out.
Yes.
So I don't want to be quiet. I got something to say here.
Yeah.
And so just to be quiet and breathe and calm that limbic system down and
Hmm.
think, this is the most important person in the world to me. How do I want to treat them?
Yes.
How do I want them to remember me? Sometimes just thinking silly thoughts like that gets me anchored.
Hmm.
How important is this really?
I recently gave a couple the assignment of writing their own eulogy as though it were written by their child.
Ooh,
It was a tough assignment. One of them did a good job and the other one refused to do it.
oh, interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. See, I always pay attention to everything, right? I'm a trained observer. That's
Hmm.
my job.
Hmm.
Because I think everybody has an innate desire to be well.
I think we all want the same thing. We want to be well, we want to be happy.
And illness begins with I, and
Hmm.
wellness begins with we.
Okay.
Hmm. And so we want to make sure I want to stay connected to my people. I want to listen. I want to pay attention. And when I get into it's just me and me,
Hmm.
and we know that because people have strive to have many relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's really nice to be in a healthy relationship because, yes, you have your moments and you have things you need to navigate. Life doesn't get,
Right,
magic.
right.
But once you have the tools to navigate it, what a relief.
Yeah, it's a huge relief. My late husband, Jim, and I, we were both widowed. When we married, we had 5 children between us, and 4 of them were
Mm.
teenagers.
Oh my Lord.
And actually, they didn't cause the trouble between us. It was the 8-year-old son of Jim's that we wanted to co-parent. But we had very different parenting styles. We ended up fighting, disagreeing, and then fighting a lot until finally we admitted we needed help. And it took us a year to find effective help. But once we found a coach that taught us how to talk respectfully, even when you're disagreeing, what to do with your anger, like shut up, calm down, and then come back to this discussion later. We learned those skills, so we were so committed to practicing those skills because we were so tired of being in pain.
Yeah.
And once we learned those skills, we had 17 more years together of beautiful peace, this wonderful love flowing back and forth. And like you said, it wasn't like life was perfect, but we had the skills to navigate.
Yes, because everything happens, right?
Yes.
Everything happens.
Yeah, we're not immune. Just because we've learned some good skills doesn't make us immune.
That's right.
Life just gives us opportunities to practice what we've learned.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Lisa and I did the same thing. We've been together almost 18 years now, and when we got together, my relationships went better when I found the right gender. That did help too.
Okay.
I gotta say that.
Okay.
And what happened was we went to nonviolent communication classes. We went to counseling. We knew how to mess up a relationship.
Yeah.
We wanted to make sure that we got what we needed to navigate
Oh,
the
good for
normal
you.
ups and downs that happen.
I think,
Nancy, this is what I think is the fatal error, is that absolute refusal to ask for help.
yes.
I don't care what the person has going on. If they will ask for help
Right.
and keep asking until they get an answer.
I say that it requires humility
Yes.
to admit I need help.
Yeah, it does.
And it probably took 2 or 3 years past when Jim and I needed help before we admitted, okay, if we knew how to fix this, we would have done it.
Right.
Yeah.
It wasn't for lack of trying.
No. We kept trying, but we kept doing the same thing over and over again that didn't work. Well, Karen, what a pleasure to meet you.
You too.
And I'm so impressed. I'm so grateful for the choices that led you out of your own addiction. I'm so grateful that your son is clean and sober and learning how to navigate a healthy life.
Right.
And thank you so much for sharing this with us on this video today and for the work you are doing in the world to benefit others with the journey that you've been through.
Well, thank you, Nancy, and thanks for asking me.
Hey, I've met so many fabulous people with this platform that I have with Authority Magazine. I'm just so impressed with how many good, learning, growing people there are in the world who turn around and use what they've learned to help others.
I know. There's a lot of goodness, huh?
There's a lot of good that comes out of this pain if we choose to come out of it.
That's right.
Well, thank you again, and I'm going to stop the recording, and this will be transcribed into a written article, and published in Authority Magazine, and I'll let you know when that happens.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
You're
Thanks for the
so,
opportunity.
you are so welcome. My pleasure.